Our project is on the petroleum industry of China. We will be covering China's history, the quantities and infrastructure, exploration and productions, and the imports and exports of China. The constant demand for resources in China is a constant correlation to its rapidly growing population. The primary resource China strives for in modern day is petroleum. China's first oil venture began in 1950 when the two communist states of China and the Soviet Union joined together to create the Sino-Russian Petroleum Company to begin the extraction of petroleum in the Xizang's Dashanzi oil mines. Several years later, the State Council created the Ministry of Petroleum Industry, the MPI, and gave it the responsibility of developing the petroleum industry in China to make it grow. The Soviet Union and China's joint development of the Karamai and Dashuni's oil fields created a vast network of technological and knowledge transfers. The discovery of the Ding oil fields and the growing greed of the two states led to Russia's withdrawal from the partnership and disbandment of technological resources for China. Mao Zedong decided to become self-reliant in the industry and develop China's own technological procedures for petroleum excavation. The MPI was ordered to carry out military-style production, transportation, administration, and marketing. This project was referred to as the Daeking Project, and the government was fond of its results. In the 1970s, the MPI merged with the Ministry of Coal and Chemicals, which created the Ministry of Petroleum and Chemistry, which is the MPC. The same year as this merger, ground was broken for the construction of a pipeline running from Daeking to Foshan. At this point, China was becoming a major world producer of petroleum. In the late 1970s, there was a cultural revolution in China which led to a decrease in the productivity of the petroleum industry. It became evident that China's self-reliance in the field of petroleum would be short-lived due to the lack of technological advancements in China as the rest of the world's technology flourished. In response to the declining petroleum industry, the MPI was reestablished separately from the MPC in order to focus directly on petroleum. The evident failure in China's self-reliant nature caused them to switch back to international involvement. The central government developed a plan called the Big Contract, which would fund MPI as a long 100 million tons of oil were produced for the government. The MPI achieved this goal and it also received surplus, which was solid to the domestic and foreign markets. The money made from the surplus was used to enhance equipment and technology for the MPI. In only 1 year, petroleum raised $600 million in revenue, nearly half of the $1.7 billion originally invested by the government. Due to many different company involvements, the MPI was in disarray of its own ownership. Therefore, the government divided it equally between two companies, the China National Offshore Oil Corporation, the CNOOC, and the China National Petrochemical Corporation, the Sinopec. The CNOOC was in charge of the offshore explorations and joint contracts with foreign companies and functioned under the MPI, whereas the Sinopec dealt with ministries of petroleum, chemical, and textiles. This was under direct supervision of the State Council. In 1988, the government decided to open up foreign contracts in order to successfully exploit petroleum reserve in the south of the country. The first contract they signed to open these possibilities was between China National Oil Development Corporation and the Australian CSR Company. On September 17, 1988, the China National Petroleum Corporation, the CNPC, was established to replace the Ministry of Petroleum Industry, the MOPI. The government shifted all of the profits and losses to the national oil companies, the NOC, rather than a governmental-run organization. However, the government still attained the power over the economic distribution of funds and sales revenue. In 1990s, brought two trading companies that were controlled by China National Chemical Import and Export Corporation, the Sinochem. CNPC began the first company for China to attain development rights for petroleum fields overseas. In 1990, the price of crude was between $5 and $14 per barrel. By 1995, this rocketed to about $11.50 and $19.70 per barrel. In 1994, the government regulated a recalculation of crude oil prices and showed the first profit for China's oil and gas industry in several years. According to China Petroleum Information Institute, the CNPC was operating a total of 9,474 wells in 1995, about 10% of them exploratory wells. Daking, China's largest oil field, accounted for 2,851 of the total. In 1999, the CNPC accomplished building the very first long-distance pipeline built overseas. The profits continued to rise, bringing them to about $17 billion. In 2000, the main event in the oil field in China was the PetroChina being on the list for Hong Kong and New York stock exchanges.
Currently, China has the world's largest population with over a billion people living within its borders. A rapidly industrializing nation with a populace this massive causes an extreme demand for energy. This extreme demand is being met by modernizing energy technologies, innovation, and mass production of the much needed resources to continue the progression of China's ever growing economy. China's petroleum industry has greatly evolved from its early years. Now known as the world's largest energy consumer, China has matched that hunger with becoming the world's largest energy producer. Vast domestic coal mines and oil reserves satisfy majority of the country's needs for fossil fuels. Recent surveys in 2013 have estimated China holds approximately 24.6 billion barrels of oil in proved reservoirs and produce around 4.4 billion short tons of coal annually. Also, natural gas plays a vital role in meeting energy needs. Although natural gas consumption and production is much newer and smaller part of China's petroleum industry, it still provides about 5% of China's energy needs, producing around 4.1 trillion cubic feet of gas. To transition all of these raw materials to usable energy, a massive infrastructure of drills, pipelines, railways, and refineries were needed. Pipelines and railways, thousands of miles long, crisscross China. Pipelines bring millions of barrels of crude oil or natural gas across the landscape from the fields where they were harvested to storage facilities and refineries where they can be processed for use. Millions of pounds of coal is carted on railways from mines to the industrial centers of China where it can be used for energy production.
In about 1993, China's oil production and consumption were even with 3 million barrels of oil produced each day and 3 million barrels of oil consumed each day. Today, China's oil situation is much different. Since 2010, China has been able to bring its oil production up to over 4 billion barrels a day, but unfortunately, it is still not enough to reach the demand. Each year, the daily consumption of oil in China has been growing and growing. This year alone, China is predicted to consume about 11 million barrels a day. That leaves 7 million barrels a day to be imported to China from other countries. Although they must import so many barrels of oil, they are able to increase their production from 1993 to now to almost 5 million barrels a day. This impressive feat is because China's large and mature oil fields. About 80% of China's crude oil is produced onshore, and the other 20% of crude oil production is from shallow offshore reserves that were set up as of 2014.
Prior to 1950, the Chinese economy was based on a Soviet-style economy. This was a low-production economy that focused on agriculture. A mixed economy was put into place that would ignite the manufacturing industries. The change in the Chinese economy in the late 1950s led to a dramatic increase in industrial plants. With this industrialization of the iron and steel workings, mainly came a large need for oil and other fuel sources. Largely with the Daking and other subsequent oil fields, China was able to supply this demand without any need of importing foreign oils. However, with the increase of industries continuing through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, China's domestic oil was not able to keep up with the demand. Beginning in the early 1990s, China was forced to import oil for its own plants. This net importation continued until the early 2010s, when the demand for oil decreased with its own oil production capacity increased, when they became a net exporter for refined oil products.
The history, quantities of fossil fuels, infrastructure, exploration, imports, and exports are the topics we covered in our presentation. Hopefully, you've learned more information about the petroleum industry in China, its history, and its climb to becoming an economic and energy producing powerhouse through this video.